Okay, so I'm going to be making a 3-point pre-equalized anchor, and in order to do this, I'm using a piece of cordelette because it's just easier. So one thing you want to start off with your cordelette is you're going to isolate the ends, and you're actually going to tie figure 8 knots. In this case, they work the best because they take up most of the slack. So I'm going to take one of the ends, and I'm actually going to tie figure 8 in on a bite just to take up more slack. So here's my working end. I'm going to go around the standing end, and instead of just coming through because I'm going to take up more slack, I'm going to pull and make a bite through. Maybe a little bit more there. There we go. Alright, and because of that bite, I have a little loop that I have to clean up, but that's easily done now that we're nice and clean. Pull my loop over, and I'm going to tighten it down. So that effectively created my first end for an anchor point. I'll lay that down here. I'm going to do the exact same thing on this side. Take my working end, wrap it around, poke it through. Alright, got lots of room, so I'll pull a bite through to take up that slack. Dress my knot. Alright, so first thing we've done, we've isolated the ends and created figure 8 knots to hook into. So I'm going to take a carabiner, hook it into one, and hook it onto my anchor point. Take a second carabiner, I'm going to hook it onto the other one, and I'm going to hook that in to my next anchor point. Always make sure when you're doing a 3-point or 3-point self-equalizing anchor that your isolated ends are beside each other. So once we're there, I'm going to grab the cordelette, both strands, and I'm going to tie in an overhand knot. Okay, once I've done that, just below that knot, I'm going to tie in a second overhand knot. Okay, once I've got my 2 overhand knots, I'm not tightening them down yet because we'll do some adjusting afterwards, but I'm going to go to the loop on the end of my cordelette, hook in my last carabiner, and hook that to my third anchor point. Again, we can see where my knots are. If I come all the way over here, they're not going to follow my lead-stir acronym because they're not really equalized, so I'm going to distribute that a little bit by cleaning up my knots. Again, these knots don't have to be level, but we do want things to be equalized in the long run. Okay, so we're now ready to come down past our limiting knots. We've got 2 strands here. We want to make sure we put a loop in one of them, creating our magic X, and then we can put our carabiners in there. So there's one carabiner, we'll put in a second carabiner, and we're going to make sure that it's opposite opposed. So here we have a 3-point self-equalizing anchor, and I'm going to go through my lead-stir acronym real quick because I've done it in all the other videos. I'm making sure that it's limited, not a lot of extension. If something fails, the next thing I want to check is make sure that I've got angles that are less than 90 degrees, and you can see that here. Once we're checked our angles, the direction, because it's self-equalized, it's got a little bit of direction, but it's generally going straight down, not way off to the side. It's pretty solid. If we look at the macro, again, big picture, what's around it, are there any cracks around it, what kind of rock are you going into, the detail, looking at where you're anchored into, those sorts of things, making sure that you're not going into rusty bolts. Timely. This one takes a little bit longer just because you have to put in a couple extra knots, but still pretty quick to build, not a lot of time. And then, are we equalized? Obviously, we're pretty equalized. Not a lot of tension going to one over the other. All of them have the same amount of tension for the most part, which is good. And we're redundant. One thing that's to note, in this configuration, it is possible that you do lose some redundancy, but for the most part you still have 3 points of connection. So if we do lose an anchor, you're still hooked in, and you can see that here. So that is a 3-point self-equalizing anchor.